Charlie Hebdo satirical news magazine in Paris, France. In 2015, 2 Muslims killed 12 people and injured 11 others. Additional attacks followed. This was not the first artist, writer, musician, or public speaker to be martyred for expressing offensive ideas or images. This video is for people who are interested in freedom of speech. This video may not be for you if you believe that people expressing sacrilegious ideas about Jesus or Muhammad should be punished. My intention is not to offend. It is a discussion between 2 artists talking about art and faith. My objective in this video is to allow Bob Smith to give his best arguments for his studio work. Everyone is for freedom of speech for themselves. What about for the other people? What if they're an atheist? Or even an anti-theist? What if you can't see the logic or rationale in what they're communicating? The only way you can hope for freedom of speech when you're marginalized is how do you handle it when you're in power? Normal Bob Smith is an atheist who has offended many. His Jesus dress-up magnets made the news in the Washington Times and other news media. The American Family Association lobbied against Bob Smith's work. After 250,000 complaints, Urban Outfitters removed his magnet sets from their stores. In 2004, a lobby group pressured Smith's web hosting service, and he had to find a new host. Bob has also stirred up people by showing up on the subway or Coney Island dressed like the devil. He was featured in Neil Abramson's documentary film Bob Smith USA, and he runs a brisk freelance practice. I caught up with Bob, who is currently living in Michigan, taking care of his aging parents. This is our first interview. Bob, let's start off by talking about Amazing Strangers,
All right.
your video work with that. Warhol said, my idea of a good picture is one that is focused on famous people, and Sid Vicious, I read you were into Sex Pistols. He said films are about lies, they're about making things look glamorous. So it seems to me you're going more with the Sid Vicious kind of approach to picture making.
When I look at what Andy Warhol did with his factory, their factory was right there at Union Square. All of his eclectic ne'er-do-wells were all from that mid-city kind of area, Lower East Side. And I've always seen a very close comparison to what Andy was doing with having all these different people surrounding him and making art with them. But I believe in both the statements, even though I don't consider Sid Vicious any kind of a hero of mine or anything. To the Sex Pistols, I'm more into Johnny Rotten. Sid Vicious, much more troubled soul. He died of a heroin overdose. I've always seen the lead singer, Johnny Rotten, as more of a someone who, watching the movie about the Sex Pistols, it was listening to his voice that really made me say, I need to put what I feel is true out there, even if I'm scared.
You know, Warhol used the Polaroid. You primarily are just using your camera from your phone.
I don't know how much you've read, but I just recently I fell through the ice at the lake that I live on.
Wow!
And this camera, this is the typical camera I use right here. It fell in the lake with me, and now it is dead. I was walking out here with the dog. There's even video of me walking my dog. And I turned the camera off just before I fell through and ruined my camera.
Oh.
But that happened just last week. And
I'm sorry.
Didn't realize how close I was to death until after all that happened. And I mean, it was really scary. But I know I use a regular camera.
Let's play off of that. You're in the water. It's icy. Did you rethink your lack of faith?
No. It was save myself. My first thought was the ice broke. The ice has broken. I always had this idea that if I see the ice breaking, I'll just kind of hop off. Why do so many people succumb to, falling through the ice? But that's not how it works. You're walking and then you just go and you're down, and it just as the floor breaks. I start grabbing at the ice and it breaks, and I grab here and the ice is breaking. Everywhere I grab, the ice is breaking. And the first thought that went through my mind is, I am alone. And then I remembered what to do. And you put your arms out, distribute your body weight as far, and pull yourself up on the ice. Once I was up on like a seal, kind of like a seal. Once you're up on the ice, you pull yourself a few feet to be away from the thin ice. I was totally drenched, and I had to walk a half mile back across the lake, hearing it crack under my feet while I was walking, because I weighed now another 20 or 30 pounds of all this water. No, not for a second did I think God save me or anything like that. No, in the core of myself, I am personally 100% convinced that it is all made up and a myth. It fits in with all the other myths and gods that we've created around the world and throughout history. And I'm so convinced of that it doesn't even enter into my mind as like,
Sure.
Come magic man, save me, whatever. I don't feel that way.
So you don't think the statement, there are no atheists in foxholes, is a true statement, apparently?
Oh, there are atheists out there in war, and they are in foxholes. I will tell you firsthand, I've had people who are in foxholes contact me, and they are atheists. And also I would say that statement always has struck me as kind of as a bad reason to believe. It's basically saying believe because we're going to put you in the most scary situation you could possibly be in. Let's say we put you in a war with bullets flying over your head and you're sunk in a hole. And I found that sometimes your worst decisions can be made when you are desperate.
The statement's not necessarily pointing to a specific religion.
You can't get around the fact that the statement means when you're in a really scary situation, I bet you'll believe in anything. If I told you that a guardian angel, I don't know, would you believe in guardian angel if you were forced to at gunpoint?
You have spent a lot of time in Union Square with, there's no politically correct word for homeless people.
I wouldn't call all the people there homeless. In fact, many of the people that you named, you might think are homeless, but they're not. Roman the fart smeller is not homeless.
Okay.
And Wendell, his nephew came to the park once. Hey, Uncle Wendell, what's going on? And I said, did you just call him Uncle Wendell? And I was like, come over here. And Wendell came over and said, you are not allowed to interview my nephew on camera. And I said, how about off camera? I just want to talk to him. So I talked to Wendell's nephew, and he said, my mom, Wendell's sister, we love Wendell, and he's an artist, and he can come around the house whenever he wants. We have a couple rules. My mom has a couple rules for him. He has to leave all of his clothes out because he's very dirty, and he also needs to take a bath. And Wendell's he doesn't always want to do that, and so he doesn't want to come to and stay with us and be with us. And he has his own ways of making money out there. And many of the people, especially in New York, aren't homeless. I would maybe even use the term on the street. There are people who spend most of the time on the street, but they have a bed somewhere. Sometimes it's a bed they pay $5 a night for, or sometimes it's a squat. Sometimes they are living with their parents, or they're living, or they have a home. Or there are people who live in apartments in New York and have been living there for all their lives, and they look homeless, and you would be shocked to find out that that's just a normal New Yorker, or an eccentric New Yorker.
Shaggy?
Shaggy's not homeless. No, he lives in Jersey, skateboarder, full-time job, working in a mail room. Been working there for something like 30 years.
Surely his father, Signs, is homeless.
Signs, his father.
Oh, he's not really.
Sort of do that as a little bit of a joke, but we want everyone to play along because it's just better that way. Signs likes it. We all love it. So Signs, his father, he would even tell you that he's not homeless. If you asked him, he would say, no, I got a place right uptown. I will admit that I don't know the specifics. Sign is very private. He will not tell me the details, but he claims that he has a home and he has a job, fixing just random work, fixing someone's motorcycle, carrying this, loading a truck here, making $20 here. And New York is a different egg when it comes to reality. Here in Michigan, these people I would consider probably are living a homeless lifestyle. New York is more, New York. It's very strange. The rules are all changed in New York because it's so crowded. There's just so many people living so many different kinds of lives out there.
I was in the city quite a bit when I went to art school, actually in Jersey, and
Okay.
the city's really become unlivable in terms of financially. It's become cleaner and much more expensive.
They kept booting me from apartments that I was paying rent on. I was doing I was, and for the record, my money, pretty much 100% of my money was made selling Jesus dress-up fridge magnets to stores across the United States. But I also padded that with freelance art jobs that I would get too. I would design dress-up games for custom-made dress-up games that work online for people, and I'd make $500 to $1,000 each time I did one of those.
Sure.
But I got priced out of New York, and I was also, you get treated like a number out there. Places I lived in for 7 years, and my landlord just said on Halloween, he said, I just sold the building, so everyone has to be out by Christmas, so cancel Christmas. You all got to be out by Christmas. Good luck. The next 2 months, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, all canceled. I got to figure out how I'm going to move and afford this craziness. And that happened. I moved 5 times in my 13 years in New York.
What are some of the challenges of having friendships with such colorful characters?
So a real quick how I ended up at Union Square. I was living in Chicago, and my website was starting to take off. The normal Bob Smith and Jesus dress up was getting really popular. One of my goals in life was to quit my full-time job where I was designing slot symbols for pull tab lottery tickets and get an art job I could consider more of a creative outlet. A friend in New York who said, do you want to come take care of my cats for a week? And she said, yes, went to New York. When I discovered Union, it was just so eclectic. So you could sit there and people watch all day. I'd never seen so many interesting and creative and all kind of combining at this park. Then when I moved there, I just started hanging out there on a regular basis and shortly met Shaggy there, who just got along with the skater kids and everybody who was there. And you just started to realize that these are all these people who come around, everyone from Roman the Fart Smeller to Wendell the Signs to all the different groups, the skaters, the drug addicts in the back, the people who come from the West Village, from the East Village, from North and South. Most of the people there were just friends there at the park. Shaggy was one of the few who we became friends who would, spend time at each other's house and go out and get something to eat or go out to a club or something. Most of the people were people I was friends with only at the park, and that was very common. Everyone who hangs out at that park, most of them only know each other from seeing each other at the park all day. You lose that friendship in the winter because no one goes to the park in the winter, and then when spring hits, you're like, hey, there's Wendell, there's whatever, each person shows up. There are acquaintances, you all make friends at the park, and the more regular you are. I became quite a regular because I started going there in like 2002 when I moved out there, and I went there at least once a week, if not more, for the 13 years I was there. So they were just people who I just saw all the time, and they knew where I was coming from because I didn't change my habit and they did not change their habits, and watching their habits, and they would voluntarily come to me to be on camera often, except for the people who didn't want to be on camera, like peepers or like other things that I filmed, fights or many of my friends and acquaintances that I've had a good handful of people die and most of the reasons they died were heroin related. Out of everything that happened there at the park, it was heroin. One of the things that everyone in Union had in common was they were all stubborn and weren't going to be told what to do. That was a very common thread through almost everybody who hung out there, is you aren't going to tell me what to do. In fact, if you tell me what to do, I'm going to purposely go to the opposite just to show that you got no control over me. And you kind of have to live with somebody having that attitude. My friend Joey Boots died of a heroin overdose out there. And he made it very clear to me that sometimes things got very grim for him in the wintertime. And that's when we didn't see much of each other. Shaggy and I would try and get him to come out and hang with us at Starbucks or whatever. But
people that have been pushed out of religious homes.
Kids.
Can
I'll say flat out, kids 18 and younger. Yes. Yep. There were a little group. We called it the roach nest, and it was an endearing term, but there was just a pile of kids who all came and they spent the night in big groups over at the subway station at the steps, and 90% of them were there because of their sexuality and their religious parents who would rather have those kids dead than gay or trans or, whatever. That there are people who call themselves good and religious who would rather have their children dead. And they're the same people who put a abortion is wrong sign in their front yard. Well, this is my room, and this is my little workstation here over here.
Oh, okay.
And my workstation, I have every set of magnet sets that I have available. That's the Star Wars. I'm not sure if you're familiar. And my Union Square postcards. And this Wendell made a hat. This is a Wendell hat that Wendell made for me. Maybe we can do our next interview in this.
Oh, that's awesome.
But last time in 2018, when I was in Union Square, I paid him to make me this hat. And I made a little.
Wendell, it's interesting because there's so many kind of type B people. Wendell just seems like a workhorse. Like he's just busy all the time. Like
he's been doing that for decades.
Yeah.
When I moved there in 2000, Shaggy introduced me. He said, that guy's been around since the 90s, maybe even the late 80s doing this. He was a victim of the crack epidemic in the 80s. He got out of it and started just doing that, dressing up weird and making his own clothes at Union Square. All the time, people coming up and handing him large amounts of money or giving him fabric because he's such a staple in the neighborhood and people want to help him out. He's a very stubborn man, and if the weather's nice, he's not going to go inside. He's going to stay out, and he has to be forced by the weather to leave the streets to go inside.
Your ability to stand your ground and not waver when you got somebody jacked up on drugs and they're in your face, a bodybuilder who's just up in your face.
Crackhead Tony.
Any moment, you just kind of like you're waiting for a swing.
By sitting out there for as long as I did, I had seen Tony before and I knew how he was and I knew what to expect. When I turned on my camera on Tony, I knew what my relationship with him was. I knew he could be a dangerous person.
Considered an underground icon in the New York art scene.
Like I said, I was very flattered. The first time I've ever heard that.
Talk about your art school experience, kind of the start of your interest in art.
My only official training was at the Colorado Institute of Art, which is now bankrupt and defunct. Most of my skills and talent were tweaked just in my own personal life, drawing in sketchbooks every single day in the 90s, and
explore your faith background.
Raised in a Christian home by my Christian parents, did the whole, went to youth groups, Wednesday night youth group, church on Sunday, and went on camping trips. This was all in Denver. I was living in Colorado at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was a believer. I was never a proselytizing believer. They would take us out on as a youth group to Chicago to go preach to people. And I kept a journal. I filled up books. And I would write about my belief, trying to make sense of my own beliefs. When I look back on it now, I see why I filled up so many books with confused writings trying to make sense out of religion, because it did not make sense to me in any way why a God behaves in this way. How I am told that a God behaves is nothing like I would behave if I were a God. I couldn't relate. I couldn't relate to I'm not going to give you any solid proof. I'm going to hide, but I expect you to believe in me, and if you don't, you're going to be punished. And there were so many things that didn't make sense. And I was confused. And it started to really distress me. Like I was realizing when people would talk to me about what my beliefs were and stuff, I would say things that I sound like a crazy person with some of the stuff I say, with, rising again, and we'll all be up there, and you'll see all your relatives again, and I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to live forever, and none of it fit with the reality I saw around me. The option of not believing was presented, and it was the first time I'd ever really thought about it, that what if there isn't? What if I'm praying to nothing and this is all just a hoax or just a whatever, just a myth like every other God that's been believed in our history? It really fell apart very quickly when I really put that out as this could be an option, because everything kind of made sense when that was the case. There not being a God, all of this makes sense in my mind. I'm only more staunch in my belief that there probably isn't a God at all. No, I am convinced there isn't. It's so clearly made up to me. I'm hedging my. It's like I feel like I'm trying to be polite when I say there probably. It couldn't sound more bogus to me.
Your final deconversion happened when you were maybe 30. Is that right?
My birthday was approaching, and I was not happy with life.
Mm-hmm.
I was working at a job where I felt not at all creatively inspired, designing these slot symbols for lottery tickets and pull tab tickets that were open bingo games that are played in old folks' homes is what it is. And I had no relationship, never had a relationship at that point. I was still a virgin at that point, frankly. And I was confused about what I believed. I talked to a friend of mine and she said, you should maybe try therapy. And I went to a therapist and she seemed just as troubled as I was. I remember sitting there across from her and she was gnawing on her pencil while she was listening to me. And I looked and all of her pencils had chew marks all over her pencils. And I was like, I think I know what my problem is. And I narrowed it down to those three things. I wasn't being creative. I was single and lonely. I was lost in what I believed. Those three things I needed to fix. And when I figured that out, that's when everything changed. And I took my old artwork of Jesus dress up, and when I felt no God around me, the idea of it became very real. This whole God thing is pretend, and no one's going to tell you that because they all want to say it's real because they all have the same fear. And I was going into my apartment building and the lights were out in the stairwell, and I had 3 floors I needed to walk, and I was walking them. And I got to my door, it was pitch black, and I dropped my keys on the floor and I couldn't see anything. And I started to have a panic attack. And I fell to the ground and I was like, okay. This is what it's like. This is what nothing is like. When I die, it's going to be nothing. And this is how scary it is. I had an epiphany that I needed to fight back, that I didn't need to succumb to fear to form what I believed. I could stand up for myself and say, you know what, if that is the deal, I can handle it and I'm going to stare it in the face. And I had the artwork ready, and that's when I started to build my website. And the first pages of hate mail that I was answering or replying to were the first time I've ever really started kind of telling what I'd been like keeping inside me for so long. And that's what hate mail felt like to me, as a way to start responding to they were saying the things that I already knew what they were thinking, because the hate mail was coming in and I was expecting it. And I was like, I know everything these people are going to be pissed at for me doing. I stand behind what I did, and I still stand behind what I did.
Go ahead and describe some of these projects, some of your past work. And then, let's start with that.
We'll start with Jesus dress up. Drew it back in my art school days as a joke. I was basically sitting in my room and wanting to be bad. And I was a believer at the time even. Mm-hmm. And it was an idea that came to me because I had seen other dress-up games. And I was like, I can draw a dress-up game. In fact, I kind of like the idea of a dress-up game. It's goofy and funny, and drew Jesus on the cross. But back then, when I drew it back in the early 90s, there was no internet. Then when the internet finally came around and I had this epiphany, I was like, this is the game I should make. I found this book by Linda Weinman, who talked about how to make dress-up games online. She was a computer programmer, and I put Jesus dress up online. And then shortly after, I made a site, Normal Bob Smith, so that people could contact the person who made Jesus dress up, because I wanted to hear from them. That was my first big project. It thrust me into the limelight immediately. Or within a couple months, it was getting millions of hits. And one of my coworkers threw a magazine down in front of me, and it was open to a page where it had my Jesus dress up in it. And I was noticing it. I would go to work, and when I'd come home, I'd have a dozen hate letters, or I'd have even more, and I was anxious to respond to all of them and then post the responses on my webpage.
Who would you consider your target audience for something like that?
Anybody. My target audience was, I wanted religious people to come. I wanted people who weren't religious to come and know that they weren't the only ones, because that's the biggest problem when it came, especially back in the 90s, when there wasn't an internet to go and communicate with people who have different thoughts that, you can't find in your neighborhood. It was to connect with other like-minded people. It was to get people interested in the conversation, people who didn't even want to talk about it or consider it before. I have to admit that I wanted the haters, because I knew that they would spark a conversation that was important. Getting people coming and saying, oh, this is cool, you're great, I agree, that doesn't spark a conversation. The complaint letters, those spark conversation.
A lot of your work feels a little more like performance art to me. It has a certain, it relies heavily on, not just on reader interpretation, which is the normal, but more of an interactive.
Absolutely.
I do this, and this is how you respond. You get angry.
They're giving me so much fodder. Can I call this art, or can I call this actual writing? Because they're just giving it to me. Whereas when I sit and actually draw a portrait, that's me all by myself making something happen. Whereas when people are sending stuff to me or whatever, you're absolutely right. It was an interactive project.
Is it your objective to see people deconvert?
My objective, I think the most amazing thing about it, the thing that fascinated me the most, was getting people to explain things in words on why they believed, and having to make them listen to themselves at how crazy they sounded. Because that's what I saw in me, is when I started explaining what I believed, I was like, the words that are coming out of my mouth sound bonkers. You could put me in a straitjacket in a padded room and I'm saying things and I'd look right at home. I wanted to hear people explain to me, why do you believe? Tell me. I want you to say it in your own words. And because it's fascinating. Around, I would get people from around the world. Some people would say, like, I remember having a guy tell me that in his culture, you can take your sins and put them into a goat, and then you kill the goat or you send it out of town, and all of it takes all of your sins with you. Yeah, and I was like, that's fast. All these kind of neat little stories, and all we're trying to do is get rid of the guilt that we have for all the stupid things we do. It's easy to believe that someone will come and take that all away, because it feels so good to think I can get rid of all this and I don't have to do anything except kind of put my head down and pray that someone will take the blame for me, or I can put it in a goat, or if I put my head against a cow's head, it will transfer all of that stuff that I'm responsible for to the cow, and then we slaughter the cow and eat it, and that's our little tradition that we do to get rid of everything we've ever done that's bad. Christians do it with Jesus, and it's one of the reasons that I got Satan on a cross tattooed on my arms. I have these tattoos of Satan on a cross on each arm. There's no one who can take responsibility for your sins or for your bad deeds. And to think that that is possible, you're already getting off on the wrong foot. If we kill that person over there, then everything I've ever done wrong is taken care of. And that's not how the world works. And I completely understand why people want the world to work that way.
In the documentary, Bob Smith, they were interviewing your mother, and she didn't seem too concerned about you. She still seems to have her faith, and she kind of feels like you are taken care of by God regardless of what you think.
That's true. When I told them that I was now an atheist, my mom was like, well, we're going to pray even harder for you now.
And are your siblings, are they atheists also, or are they believers?
My siblings are not Christians. I'm sure it breaks my mother's heart that that's the case, but that is, and the same with their kids too. My parents have been unsuccessful when it comes to passing down their religious beliefs to their family.
When you think back on your experiences in faith, like what do you miss?
You gave me that question, and I had a whole day to think about it, and I could not think of anything. There were things that it did well for me. When I was a kid, it immediately gave me a group of friends, some of my best friends at that time, and still a couple of them to this day. If I were to believe, how would that look? I can't picture it. And I'm sorry to say that the only picture I could think of is if I had some sort of serious brain damage or something, and it made me a believer again, or things got so grim in my life and so hopeless and so dire, and my brain was not functioning properly, and I just lost all hope, and I was not thinking straight. Maybe, but
you're talking like Christopher Hitchens. I know he said that
he's a hero of mine, but
as he was facing his mortality, he said, if I do reconvert, you'll know that I'm not in my senses.
I mean, I never say never. I try never to say never about what my future will be. But yeah, I can't picture it happening for me. It's impossible for me to picture it happening. It may, who knows? You never know. I've heard of People who were believers became atheists and then became believers again.
You sell a shirt that says idiots that has their religious symbols on it. Has your experience been that people of faith are less intelligent?
Familiar with the coexist bumper sticker?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
When I made that, my idea was the coexist people were idiots. And,
yeah, because
I agree that no, I don't think religious people are idiots. No.
And what you're saying is these religions can't coexist because
Written not to.
They demand
it's written in the book. Each one of them have a why you do not get along with this other religion. They are false prophets. They are of the devil. Christians don't look at Buddhists and think, what good people. They just believe in a different version of Jesus. No, they think Buddhism is of the devil. Each one of these other religions, everyone that is in that coexists, the yin yang and the Muslim moon and star.
One of the main reasons I wanted to talk with you is your work is so charged. It's offensive to so many people, and I'm an advocate for freedom of speech. And I know there'll be Christians that would have issues with me even having this dialogue with you.
Mm-hmm.
What are the boundaries? And as someone who pushes those boundaries, do you feel like there are any boundaries that should be set?
Yeah, I'd seen one of the things you wrote was should there be a fine or something, $500. One of the things that hanging out at Union Square really drove home for me is the importance of freedom of speech. And it made me an extremist almost, because when I first started hanging out at Union, Bush was president, and there were a group of people that would hang out there to protest the Bush presidency. 9/11 was orchestrated by the Bush administration, these banners. Personally, don't think there should be limits on freedom of speech, because anytime, the limits, like they say, you can't shout fire in a crowded movie house, or when you start making violent threats towards somebody, or you're putting someone's address on the internet and saying, go kill this person or whatever. Mm-hmm. That's not freedom of speech. Making fun of the gods, saying bad things about a deity, absolutely, those should be allowed at all costs. We need to allow that, because the second you make a deity off limits, the second you make anything too sacred, that this cannot be joked about, otherwise we will punish you, whether it's fine, prison, death, whatever it is, you're basically saying I'm putting someone else in charge of deciding what can and can't be said. And that's a problem we're kind of happening right now with the no one trusts the news. Do we censor lies? How do we manage these people are lying, these people aren't lying, these people get all? You can't do it. You have to let people speak. I think at the bottom of the list of things you should worry about people speaking negatively about is religion.
You did this interview with Mancow, which, Mancow is kind of the conservative version of Howard Stern, maybe, for people.
Yeah. That was my first ever big public interview. That was my first public interview ever.
I would assume you probably felt a little knocked off balance by
No, I knew exactly what I was going in for. By that point, I'd already answered all this hate mail. I was not going into it like, gee, what's happening here? I knew he was going to make a spectacle out of me. And because I knew of his history. I lived there in Chicago, and he's a Chicago DJ. In fact, I even prepared for it. On Jesus Dress Up, I drew a little mask of Mancow. It was Mancow caricature, and put it on the game so that people could put the mask on Jesus. He had all of the audio equipment on his side and all of the loudmouth stuff, and every time I tried to say something, he would click me off. I really knew all I wanted was I knew people would find me no matter what. If he was talking about me, he wouldn't even let me say the name of the web address. I didn't care. No, I loved it. I'm the one who took all the audio and put it online so everyone could hear it. I was very pleased with how it went, frankly. It was all part of I'm sick of being pushed around. I can take it, and I can put it right back at you.
Have you had physical threats against you?
Yes. I've never had an actual physical thing happen.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, but I had people threaten me on a regular basis. They're included in the hate mail section of my site. And I even have pages that are dedicated to just the death threats or just the threats of violence. Most death threats are bogus. most of the time they're done by some stupid kid. I had Muslim death threats. Can't live in fear. The reason I ended up doing Muhammad dress up was to show that I'm calling your bluff. You cannot make me worship this God in any way. And if that is your tactic of you worship my God or I'm going to kill you, if the person saying that doesn't see the problem with that, society will.
Hmm.
I can't live like that.
Where do you get your morality from? You know, you read the teachings of Jesus. It talks about visiting the person in prison and some of those things. I would assume you would agree with some of those kind of things.
It's as simple as the golden rule. It's
Okay.
basically empathy. It's what do I want done to me in this situation? Religion makes it too complicated because it is that simple, in my opinion. And that solves most moral problems. I see a lot of people when I discuss this with them trying to confuse the issue. I take it through dictate of the Bible. The Bible says, don't do this, so I never do that, or when I do, I know it's a sin. I take it through thinking it out and thinking how, generally be nice to people. Don't lie. When you tell someone you're going to do something, you're kind of you're asking them to you're telling them this is what I plan to do. This is a truth to me, and if I don't do it, I'm going to be breaking a promise that I make to you. And I don't want you to break a promise to me. If you're going to tell me, just tell me you're not going to do it instead of breaking a promise. And
Do you feel like you are as moral of a person as you were before as a believer? I mean,
I feel more so. When I was a believer, there's an out when you're a believer. Because when you're a believer, you can sin. You just have to ask for forgiveness afterwards. The asking for forgiveness is pretty simple. You put your head down and you go, so sorry, please forgive me. And then it's done and it's over with. When you are an atheist and there isn't that magic wand to make it go away, to put your bad deeds into a goat and then flush it out of town, when you actually have to take responsibility for what you do, and when someone looks you in the eye and says, you lied to me, you can't just look at them and say, hey, I put that in a goat, or I asked God forgiveness for. You have to look and face what you did. I remember being a teenager with my friends, and I had made up a lie. Hey, you know how you said you beat up Travis? I was like, why did you say that? You didn't beat up Travis. And I was like, there is no way out of this except to stop doing it. Stop lying, Bob, because you look like an idiot. I've got to stop this childish behavior of making up stories. That's how I look at being an atheist, is you have no choice but to take responsibility for your actions. Whereas as a religious person, you do have a choice.
When you look at the issue of morality and you look at Christian culture, it's a little confusing because if you actually look at American Christianity, it doesn't really represent the teachings of Jesus. So I'm gonna describe this out and tell me where you would go with this. So Jesus said, if you have two coats, give one away. Don't think about saving up treasures. Live a life of sacrifice. Live a life of being gentle. If you take that framework away, how willing is a person who's not religious willing to live a sacrificial life? Now, you could easily argue atheists are just as good as anybody else, but maybe everybody's falling short.
One of the best quotes, I believe, from Christopher Hitchens: without religion, good people will do good things and bad people will do bad things. And religion gets those good people to do bad things. If I didn't witness it on such a regular basis, and I see it even with what's going on with Trump, and I don't understand how it shocks me, because I'm someone who believes that we should have universal health care, free schooling for everyone. It's so obvious to me that those two things would only improve a society if you make sure the people are healthy and educated. I am stunned that it is the believers who are saying those are the evil ideas. I don't understand it. My parents believe this. I used to have arguments with them. Now I write them off when it comes to their political beliefs because I just think they're bonkers. They've allowed their church or Trump or politics or whatever it is to, again, through tell them what they believe instead of giving them the tools to figure out what actually is good.
It's hard to find a Bible verse that says God wants us to have low taxes or to have a comfortable middle class life.
Or not let people from another country into our country,
That's right.
Because they're all rapists. I can only see this way of thinking as only doing damage to religion.
If Christians lived a New Testament lifestyle, do you think you still would be a Christian? Or
what's a New Testament lifestyle?
Living a life of sacrifice.
I don't think each individual should sacrifice. Sacrifice sounds like you're disposing of things that you need that are going to hurt you, but it's to help each other. People need to first help themselves so that they can be a strong enough person to help others. If you are giving everything away and not thinking about what you believe and accepting everything you believe on the authority of someone else dictating and then I don't think you're as potent of a person to spread good through the world as someone who instead is educating themselves, figuring out the answers to things, figuring out how to help others, and then showing them how to fish.
In one of the videos you were talking about, you were chastising the gentleman from South Carolina with the bullhorn.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought there was a certain irony in the fact that it just seemed to me it's possible that you're kind of doing the same thing when you dress up like the devil. It's kind of this louder than, it's not something that people can necessarily avoid depending on the situation.
Oh, absolutely. I'll take that. And I will totally be the first to say, in 1 minute, I may complain about what somebody's doing. And then if I do something like dress up as Satan and go on the subway, I'm willing to, come to me. I'll tell you what I think. And, I think in that moment, in that particular video, my complaint was more that the person who was using the bullhorn, one is it was loud and I couldn't sit at the park. No one could sit at the park and enjoy the day because this person had a bullhorn and they were only shouting really just fire and brimstone stuff. And it's annoying because that happened a lot at the park. I would much rather have someone come there dressed as the devil and just sit there on the step than I can continue to do my thing. If they can go sit over there dressed as the devil, and that's fine. But coming to a park with a bullhorn and screaming for an hour and a half or 2 hours, sometimes all afternoon. I do think there is one that is clearly more obnoxious and in your face than the other. But I will also not deny 1 minute that I dressed up as Satan to be in people's face but I gave them the luxury of all they have to do is close their eyes or turn away and I'm out of their mind. But if you want to come and talk to me, or if you want to stare at me, went to Arizona. I was flown out to Arizona by the ASU Free Thought Society to help them for 1 week. And I stood at their atheist booth dressed as Satan, and they have preachers who come on campus. It's a much different situation when I've been outside of New York dressed.
How about
in New York? They're used to people dressing up. That's what New York is, especially in the areas I would hang out in, the East Village, West Village, Union Square. That has a long history of people dressing eccentrically and prancing the streets. But
I was in South America, and we were on a train, and the trickster would dance through the aisles, and everybody's clapping, and there was not a hint of fear.
Dress up in this outrageous outfit and just be a guy. I would stand on the corner of St. Mark's and I'd make up little rhymes while I hand out my flyers, like, God is fake, make no mistake, there ain't no fiery lake, no pearly gates, and no talking snakes. God is fake, here you go, take. And I'd hand out my flyers. But I didn't do anything that would cause people to fear me.
You're familiar with the Satanic Temple, and their goals are really political goals. But the one of the problems with it is so many people will look at them and say, "I don't understand. You don't believe in God, but you seem to believe in Satan." So it feels like a whole extra layer of disinformation you have to wade through when you dress like Satan and people are looking at you trying to figure out, well, you're an atheist, but you seem to be celebrating Satan. Maybe you even worship Satan. I think it's the performance artist in you. Like, you don't necessarily care. You're not trying to proselytize people.
I don't care if they think that either. I've had people mistake my tattoos as crosses. I've had Christians come up to me, "Oh, I like your tattoos. I have crosses on mine." And I don't mind being mistaken for that. Anything that sparks a conversation has great value to me. And handing out the flyers, dressing up as Satan, the crosses, churches do a terrible job of describing what it is to be an atheist, or describing what a Satanist is, or whatever. LaVey actually purposely does it to upset Christians. He does not believe in an actual devil. I certainly dressed up because I knew that it would upset people, for a silly reason. In my opinion, it's one thing to upset people and what you're doing is really tragic. It's another thing when you're upsetting people with a joke or with something silly, like just dressing a certain way or wearing makeup. People can handle it. I can handle looking at a person dressed as Satan and come out the other side and still be a full human being. And all it does is spark questions and maybe even spark a little magic in people's lives.
And you saw a difference in terms of how people in New York responded to that.
Oh, yeah. I would have people walk. I still remember one of the first times walking up. There was a guy drunk lying on the street. He goes, "Look at you. You remind me of old New York," he said. And I'm walking with platform shoes and the tuxedo. And totally different. New York is used to this sort of thing. And the answer is yes, I have gone to church dressed as Satan before. I was invited by this girl to come to her church. She had messaged me and said, "I see you're in New York. I'm in New York too. I think if you came to my church, you would see God." The idea when she invited me of going to church, I was like, again, I've had it. But I will go only if I can go dressed as Satan, because I don't want there to be any question on why I'm going. I do not plan to convert. I will be polite. And I said, but I also am going to ask you to ask your pastor's permission, because I'm not going to show up there and if they don't want me there, whatever. She got her pastor's permission. I went twice to her church. They invited me back a second time when they had a prophet come who was going to preach. He could see tunnels that were dropped down from heaven, and he would point at them and say, "There's a tunnel to heaven that has just dropped there in the back of the church." Twice I went dressed as Satan, and she dressed as an angel. She said, "I'm going to dress as an angel."
A lot of people are kind of feeling like there are these injustices, and every group is kind of pushing and shoving to kind of say, they're the martyr, and and this is, and there really are injustices. Where's the real injustices?
The first thing to go to is who has the least amount of power. And the people with the least amount of power, in my opinion, are probably going to be poor, or you are trans, or you are a person of color, especially the ones that have been focused on in the past 4 years when it comes to if you are Hispanic, if you are Muslim, or if you are Black. And how much power you have takes away from how much injustice you have. I've been seeing the videos of the billionaires right now who are crying over being screwed on their Wall Street bets because of Reddit. And the reason you don't feel sorry for them is because they have much power. Whatever protests are happening, Blue Lives Matter and that sort of thing. Do the police have a lot of power is the question you have to ask yourself. Ammunition, they have the government behind them, they have protection, they are religious people prosecuted, are Christians a persecuted person? Well, I don't know. Let's look at this thing. Do Christians have a lot of power in this world? I would say if it comes between who has more power, religious people or non-religious people, I think religious people have a little bit more power. I think that they control more of the government.
Do you feel like you've ever experienced something supernatural?
If it's supernatural, then you have an explanation. I'm willing to say I don't have an explanation and leave it at that. I know the explanation to something, why something has happened. I do not slip in whatever magic answer there might be. Mm-hmm. Even if it's something as simple as a magic lucky rabbit's foot god or ghosts or a wizard or whatever.
Most people have some kind of a story, something that they'll
There
say.
were things back in the day that I might have said so. When I was in high school, I had these two brothers, Rob and Eric. And I was best friends with them. So one time, all of a sudden, Rob was showing up without Eric. And I go, hey, where's Eric? He's let's change the subject. He's fine, whatever. A week would go by, no Eric. And I had a dream that something terrible happened to Eric. And I had this very vivid dream that I heard pounding on my closet door. I went to it, and there was Eric, all bloody and bruised, and he fell down. And I picked him up, and I said, Eric, are you okay? And he was like, I'm dying. And I woke up from that dream. The next day, when I woke up that morning, went to school, and Rob sat down with us and said that his brother had tried to kill himself. And he was fine, but he had tried to kill himself by swallowing a whole bunch of pills. He went to the hospital. Now he's in therapy. That's why he hasn't been coming to school for a week. How did I have that dream? That's incredible. That's incredible that I had a dream, and I described it, and I got a lot of attention from my friends for having had that dream and telling them about it before we heard this news. I had so much attention from it that I would keep talking about it and even embellish the dream, that he said he was going to commit suicide in the dream. And and I would add little things to make it more colorful and more exciting. And I would even kind of believe them myself. At the time, I looked at it and I was like, this is something I don't have an explanation for. How did I have a dream like this? When I look back now as an adult at this situation, and Eric not showing up and me asking Rob what's going on, and the mystery he created in my brain of, I don't want to talk about it right now, let's change the subject. And suddenly my mind can do whatever it wants. And at night I have a dream about Eric, something terrible. Our minds do that sort of thing. We pick up on things, and there's a lot more fun in thinking it's magic, and you get a lot more positive feedback, and girls wanted to come talk to me when I had this. And if I acted more distraught than I was, if I could bring up a tear or put my head down like this when they announced it at church and act like I was totally disturbed, more girls would come talk to me and my friends would come over. A lot of stories are made that way about miracles and magic and things that happen.
It's interesting with Union Square, watching the different characters and how they interact, and especially like Signs, and how he's so aggressive. But within all that aggression, it feels like what he really wants is just attention. He just wants people to notice him. Being a young person having this dream, and how you're getting this affirmation from people, pushed you to be something that maybe wasn't even completely honest, but social pressures kind of create this. So suddenly now you're like a prophet having dreams, or these different characters at the park are acting in certain ways, probably very much at the subconscious level.
Absolutely. It was such a growing experience. Those 13 years I had in New York and the time that I spent at Union Square made me a mature adult man. I learned many things. Modesty was one of them. When I first started filming down there, I was much more of a, look at that funny looking person. Look at that. Oh, look at that jerk and all that. As I started to get to know people and have more empathy for the people's situation and just befriending others and whatever. And it grew me up in many ways. And I came out the other side feeling very confident in who I was.
Tomorrow I get in my vehicle and I drive, and a semi hits me and I die. Is that it, or is there another universe? If you were going to put a percentage on it.
No one knows. And anyone who says they do know, they don't know. Do you know what happens after you die? We are all mammals, and we all have hopes and dreams of what. I think everything points to you're going to go to the same place that you were before you were born. Did you exist before you were born?
That's a good question.
Was it a big hassle not being around before you were born? Like before you were born, was there a lot of grief that you weren't alive?
It was a great inconvenience.
And that's the same thing about after you die. There is nothing more real, in my opinion, than that reality of that's what life is. It starts to get fakey when there's a magic ending. When I would have fallen in that ice, and if I would have just died, that would have been it, in my opinion. Nothing. There would have been nothing. It wouldn't even been darkness. It would have been a complete nothing. I wouldn't even know I was dead. When you realize life is that short and not to be treated like old rags, like the Bible says or whatever, this is just something you wipe your feet off on before you go to heaven. When I believed that, I had less respect for life, because it's all about, this is just a testing ground for heaven. When I became an atheist, my respect for life went 100-fold, because this is it. If I kill someone, they're not going to heaven and I can feel fine about it. That's how serious it all is. And that's why even people who I don't like, when I hear that they're dead or whatever, I'm like, it's not something I want to hear.
So Bob, you left the city and you're now taking care of your elderly parents.
Mm-hmm.
And what can we expect to see from you? What are the new projects?
I've been really enjoying drawing portraits. That's what's hanging up around here. I don't know if you can see some of my portraits that I've drawn here.
Kind of operating off of a bit of a residual income.
I have stores across the U.S. that sell the Jesus dress-up magnets, and I have 6 different types of Jesus dress-up. You can dress them up in Star Wars, at Batman, and all, stores across the United States, and even a few international. Sales definitely slowed down last year, and I would have never been able to afford living on my own.
These stores also carrying the Trump and the Muhammad one?
Sold out of the Trump ones. Only one store carries the Muhammad ones. But I also get a lot of individual sales. You can buy them directly off of my site, normalbob.com. You can buy all 6 sets for $66.
You've been a lot of fun to talk to. We both are for freedom of speech. I think we can agree. We hope that never goes away, regardless of what people believe or think, that it's extremely important that we're allowed to talk.
Yeah.
And that no one should be treated with violence because of a belief system that they hold. And that's definitely an area where you and I can agree. Last words you want to say?
The reason you don't treat people's ideas with violence is because it has the opposite effect. If anyone is out there thinking violence is going to stop a bad idea, it almost always has the opposite effect. People should know that when you commit violence against somebody, it has the martyr effect. It's a very real effect. And also it's just wrong. Your statement made me think of that freedom of speech, very important. This $500 fine, I don't care what people say, they don't deserve a $500 fine.
Thank you, Bob.
No problem. I enjoyed this.